Happy Tuesday. I hope you're having a great start to your week. We are still celebrating National Quilting Month, and we will do it all month long. So I have kind of a fun tutorial planned for us today. We are going to go through a method or a sort of recipe of designing your first quilt or designing a quilt if you are already an accomplished quilter or have already dabbled in quilting. You might find that this sort of recipe gets your creative juices flowing and allows you to be your own designer and make your own choices to create any kind of quilt pattern. It's kind of a sew as you go quilt as well. We're going to be starting off with a simple log cabin quilt block, and then I'll give you some ideas and some ways to kind of play around with that block and create your own custom quilt creation. So that's really what we're going to be talking about today. But before we get into that, let's see here. I want to know who out there would like to win a sewing machine. Anyone? Can I get some thumbs up, some emojis, something? You could win this Brother sewing machine. Isn't this fantastic? Let me just make sure I'm calling it the right thing. Brother machines have a sort of letter and number naming convention, and I thought I had it right next to me so I could let you know what this one is called. It's a straight stitch sewing machine. Hold on a second. Again, I always think I'm so prepared, and then I forget something. So bear with me just a moment. I want to make sure I get it right because the good folks at Brother have provided this sewing machine for someone to win if you enter our Casey Duffel photo contest. Now, who out there attended our Casey Duffel videocast last month? If you did, you got great instructions for creating a Casey Duffel bag like the ones shown here on the screen. And I'm sure you have put your own twist on it. You know, we have a Sulky Facebook group. It's called Sulky Stitch and Post. Many of you are already in that group, and lots of people have been showing off their finished Casey bags from our videocast. So, oh my gosh, hold on a sec. So we have encouraged you all who are posting your finished bags to go ahead and upload those to the contest. So we have quite a few people in the contest so far, and there are people you can vote on. If you aren't making a Casey bag, which why not? Because it's a fantastic pattern. If you're just interested in voting, you can do that as well. I linked to the contest page in the description of today's post, so you can head on over and vote for your favorite and or upload your photo for the chance to win. All you have to do is upload a photo, put your email address, a couple of other things for the entry form, and you're automatically eligible to win this Brother sewing machine. You will also win dream packs of Sulky supplies, stabilizers, and threads. You will also win a ASG membership to their online courses. You will also win a cutting bundle from Havel's Sewing. There are so many things to win. The prize package is over $1,900 worth of goodies. So it's not just this sewing machine, but all of those other great prizes as well. All right. The Brother sewing machine is a PQ 1500 SL high-speed straight stitch sewing machine valued at $1,199.99. So that is the sewing machine you could win simply by finishing up your bag and uploading a photo to our contest site. So I wanted to make sure that everyone was aware excuse me, that you can win this fantastic sewing machine. It comes with that sewing machine bed on it. I mean, who wouldn't love this great machine added to their sewing room. All right. So be sure you head on over to the contest link. Again, if you're not seeing that, click the little See More button and the entire description of today's post will pop up with links to everything I'm going to talk about, as well as links to enter the contest and links to vote on the contest. All right. All right. I'm getting a few. Okay. You can't win if you didn't make a bag. Great question. So yes, you do have to make a Casey duffel bag and upload a photo of your bag to the contest entry area. Voting does end on June 30th, so you do have some time to create your bag. And actually, we restocked those Casey kits at sulky.com. So if you want to grab up one of those kits for the Casey bag, you can still grab that in the gray and black version or the burgundy antique version. So you can grab up those kits. We have restocked those for you. You can grab a Casey duffel bag pattern. We have the digital pattern at sulky.com for $9.99. So you can grab up that pattern and use fabrics from your stash if you prefer. And I encourage you to head on over there at least to vote so you can see the bags that have been created so far. I love that everyone has a different take on things, which is kind of the whole point of sewing, or one of the points of sewing, is that we get to put our own twist on the things that we create. And that's what we're going to be talking about today as well when we create our quilt. All right, so in the spirit of National Sewing Month, there we go. I'm getting on track now. Takes me a little while to warm up sometimes. In the spirit of National Quilting Month, we have some great sales going on. 30% off 30-weight cotton solids and blendables thread. I'm going to be talking about those because that's really my preferred thread for quilting. It ensures that you can really see those quilting stitches. That heavier weight of thread really pops off of the surface. So all of that work you do in your quilting stitches can really be seen. And I will be showcasing a blendables variety today. I absolutely love working with the blendables thread. You get a random color every 2.5 to 5 inches across the thread length. And no other thread does this. It's really unique. And it's great for straight line quilting, which is what I did on the quilt I'm going to be showing you today. So that's on sale. Also, 30% off of sticky Fabrisolvi and soft and sheer stabilizers. Great stabilizers for adding embroidery to quilts, or even plotting your free motion stitching or plotting your straight line stitching. And I'm going to be showing you a little bit of that today as well. So lots of stuff I'm talking about is on sale right now. And this sale ends midnight on the 14th Pacific time, midnight Pacific time. So grab up all these threads and stabilizers while they are at this great, great price. All right. Another thing to take note of is our In the Hoop greeting cards embroidery sewing session is active right now. As of this morning, all of the content dropped on our Sulky education site at sewingonline.sulky.com. So if you haven't registered yet, you can still register and the content will be available to you immediately. With purchase of the In the Hoop greeting cards session, you will get an exclusive 6 design collection from Designs by Juju that includes 3 card designs to use for cardstock, 3 card designs to use for felt, and 5 bonus frame designs that you can use to create your own greeting card creations. And during the session, there are several videos that guide you through how to create these custom cards with confidence. And Julie teaches you from start to finish how to navigate the designs, how to place your cards in the hoop, the best needle and thread combinations to use, and you will have professional looking cards like nobody's business. Now, I don't know about you, but when I go to buy a greeting card and I see that they are $6 a piece, I am like, we are getting the construction paper out and we are making our own. So what better way to make your own cards than to make them in the hoop of your embroidery machine? You can even assembly line style a bunch of cards for different holidays. There's a Happy Easter card included in this set. These would be great for Mother's Day, lots of springy holidays, and even summery designs. These floral designs really are timeless. So I think you'll really enjoy these. Now, someone just asked, when is the new felt available? It is available now. At sulky.com, you can search Felty. That's what it's called, Felty. And you can find 3 assortment packs of our high quality felt. And that is what Julie recommends for these greeting card designs. It's a wonderful felt to work with. And actually, I have my top of the morning mug rug here on my wall. I used Felty for that as well. It's a great weight for embroidery. It doesn't buckle or pucker. It accepts lots and lots of stitches, so you can do really dense designs on the Felty. So that's available now if you are interested in trying out the Felty. All right, so I wanted to let you know, speaking of the greeting cards session, whenever we have a session go active, I always get nervous the night before that something isn't going to go live, or something isn't going to be clickable, or there's going to be some kind of problem, right? Because it's technology after all, and you can only anticipate so much. And there's a lot of moving parts with these sessions. We really spend a long, long time developing them, making sure they're absolutely perfect for you. And I think we've been working on this greeting card session for close to 6 or 8 months now. So I was really nervous last night, and I woke up this morning and my inbox was full of emails about the sewing session. And I just thought, I hadn't opened any of them, and I thought, oh no, here we go. Something has gone wrong. Well, I was pleasantly surprised. I started opening the emails, and they were all positive feedback. So thank you all, those of you who took the time out of your morning to tell us how much you were enjoying the session. It was just, what a way to wake up this morning. I'll just say, I'm going to read through just a couple of the great comments that have come through, because there are so many. I mean, my inbox is full. Rebecca says, great class, lots of ideas and tips. Thank you very much. Let's see. Thank you so much for all of these wonderful designs from Leah. Judy says, thank you for the instructions that you have given us on making cards. I've been trying to learn how to do this, and you've given me so much more information to work with. I have many designs by Juju Designs that I will now be adding to my card collection. Thank you. It is so nice to hear the feedback, and so good to know that what we're doing, matters, and that you're learning something from it. And it's just very validating. So thank you so much. And I hope that this, if you're on the fence about registering for one of our sewing sessions, we've got a serger sewing session. We have a garment sewing session. We have this embroidery sewing session. If you're kind of on the fence about trying it, I highly suggest, start with this greeting card session and then kind of go from there, because like I said, there's a ton of information. You can watch all of the videos on demand whenever you want. All the lessons within the session are broken up into these manageable chunks. So it's kind of meant for you to sort of schedule your sewing time when it works for your schedule. So you can take lesson 1 and then be done for the day, and come back at another time and start lesson 2 and go through those lessons and videos, and then move your way across, the entire session until it's completed. And you can also pause, rewind, fast forward, all of those things, and actually make your cards in real time if you want to do it that way too. So It's really broken up into the cardstock designs and learning about those, and the felt designs and learning about those, and then working with software to create your own designs and really expanding your embroidery knowledge as you work your way through that session. So, all right. Elizabeth says the Designs by Juju greeting cards kit is out of stock. Yes, thank you for bringing that up. The greeting cards kit sold out this morning. We have been selling it for a month or so now as we have gotten closer to this active date for the session. And so it did end up selling out. So I went into the course pages and I linked to all the items that were in the kit separately. So you can kind of, add those items to your cart and essentially make your own kit. Now, believe it or not, pre-folded cards and envelopes are really difficult to find right now. I'm not really sure why this has become a supply chain issue along with so many things in the world right now. But those cards are difficult to find. So I linked to some that I found on Amazon that are similar to the ones that we included in that kit. But you'll be able to grab all the threads. I linked to all of the thread colors that Julie chose for those designs. You'll be able to grab the stabilizer, the needles, the felty, and then I also included links for you to source those cards, envelopes, watercolor paper, and cardstock. Those are the other items that you need that are not normally found at sulky.com that we curated for that kit. So I do apologize that the kit sold out, but you will still be able to kind of piecemeal together your own kit contents and at least have the threads, needles, stabilizers that you need from Sulky easily. Those are in stock. All right. So thank you for bringing that up. Okay. All right. So those are just a few comments. I mean, Lolita says, thank you. I've made cards before, but now they will be even better. I'm also motivated to learn how to use my embroidery software. So that is great. Julie from Designs by Juju really is so easy to learn from. She makes everything seem so simple and really, really doable. So I'm glad that you are motivated to try out software. Julie uses Embrilliance software. That is also linked in the course pages. Judy is saying, I have had Embrilliance software for a few years now, and I love it. Now, if you don't have Embrilliance software, there is a trial version. You can try it out before you make a purchase. And you also watch Julie in the videos working through Embrilliance software. But if you have a different software that you already own, maybe it came with your machine purchase, you can use that to build your cards as well. So you can use some of the information that she talks about, importing designs and merging them and that kind of thing to make your own card designs. Those would apply to your software as well. It's just that's what she uses, so that's what's featured in those videos. All right. I mean, honestly, I could go on and on for the good comments here. Really enjoyed learning how to make, cards. I've tried several times to make them, but they always turned out messy. Thank you so much for doing this class. That's from Juanita. So, I mean, honestly, it goes on and on and on. So, I hope that tells you how great this session is and that you want to give it a try. Like I said, you can register for it right now, and you'll get all of those designs, all the videos, everything is ready to watch on demand when you're ready. All right, so a few other fun quilty items that I wanted to show you before we get into today's log cabin quilt tutorial. And this first one is our giveaway today. So one lucky viewer who is watching now, who is liking, commenting, sharing, all of those good things, will win the Sulky Secrets to Successful Quilting book. This has a ton of information in it, and it retails for $19.95. So one of you will be the lucky winner of this great, great book, and you can find it at sulky.com. Another thing I thought was kind of cute that we have at sulky.com is this Quilting Queen little tumbler. These are those insulated tumblers that keeps your beverage nice and cold for long periods of time. So I thought that this was really applicable to our National Quilting Month. As we move on, further into the month, you may want to pick this up. Limited quantities are available right now. So really cute little product. And, I wanted to mention this as well. Let's see, what do we call this on the site? This is a little cleaning kit, and isn't it cute? It comes with these 2 brushes for cleaning out your machine. And I just thought this was so great. First off, I love anything that's kind of self-contained, that has its own little container for you to store it in. What is this actually called? It's called the Oh So Clean Brush and Cloth for sewing machines. So that little white rolled up thing that has a little cute little pink quilt pattern on it, that's a nice little microfiber cloth that you can use to wipe down your sewing machine. And then, like I said, it comes with these 2 brushes. So a bigger brush for cleaning out like your bobbin race area, smaller brush for getting into those nooks and crannies and getting your lint and little thread ends out of your sewing machine. We never really want to use canned air when we're cleaning out the sewing machine, because that can push those threads and that lint and fuzz and all those bits of things further into your machine, and then you'll really have problems. So we really want to get in there with a brush and push it out towards the top of the machine, or towards, coming out of the machine. So these brushes are specifically designed for doing that. And it just changed to out of stock as I'm talking about it. Man, I tell ya. Well, apologies for bringing this up, and now it's out of stock. What's going on today, everybody? Here's something that's not out of stock, but I'm just going to watch and see what happens while I'm talking about it. I feel like a QVC operator right now. This is a really cute zippered bag, and it's called the Quilting Cat Zippered Glam Bag. And I don't know about you, but I can never have enough little zippered bags. And this one has little cats and little sewing machine motifs. And it would be great for organizing your threads and scissors and things on the go. Or if you're just working on a specific project and you want to keep all the threads and your particular scissors that you use for it, maybe a hand sewing needle or the pack of needles that you're using to create that quilt or that project, all kind of contained and at hand, you can use these great little zipper bags to organize that stuff. Plus, these make really great gifts. Mother's Day is going to be around the corner here soon. Birthdays, things like that. So it's still saying in stock. Let's refresh. All right. We've still got a few of these, so you could still grab that up. Okay, goodness. Well, let's get to the tutorial. Like I said, I'm going to be taking you through how to make a simple log cabin quilt block, and then give you some ideas for how to personalize it, how to change your block around, how to add sort of different elements or different ingredients to your quilt recipe to make it your own. So we're going to start here. Let me show you the finished quilt here. So I used a bunch of springy colors, and wouldn't you know it, Target just had the perfect bunny pillow. I couldn't get over it. It was the exact colors that I had featured in the quilt. So I guess I'm magically on trend with the colors of this quilt. It all started with a very cute charm pack that I have had for years. I got this assortment of this cute bunny print. I think it's a cotton and steel fabric print from long ago. And I've had it in my stash, never really knowing what I was going to do with it. So one of those, right? So charm squares are 5.5-inch squares, and they are specifically packaged so that you can create quilts quickly and easily. Everything's already pre-cut for you, so you can just get right to the sewing. There's lots of quilt patterns out there designed for pre-cuts, like charm squares. You might have seen them called layer cakes. There's many others, jelly rolls, okay? So this is a jelly roll assortment, and these are 2.5-inch strips cut to the fabric width. So 2.5-inch by whatever the fabric width is, usually 43, 44 inches, right? So I started with some pre-cuts to create the log cabin blocks. Now, you certainly can cut your own squares and your own fabric strips and create a log cabin block that is better suited to what you have in your stash. But I think buying these pre-cuts are a great way if you've never made a quilt before, or if you're teaching someone to make their first quilt, or if you want to just make a quilt that's quick and easy where you can just get right to the sewing. Pre-cuts are where it's at. So this is one that has lots of summery oranges and yellows. I'm probably going to develop something with this as we get into the summer months. But I happened to find one that had lots of these peaches and turquoise colors included in it. I didn't use all of them, but I used a good amount. And then I mixed those prints up with a collection of solids. For the solids, I cut my own strips because I couldn't find a pre-cut bundle that included all the solid fabrics that I wanted to feature. And I just thought that with this log cabin quilt design, a bunch of prints would have made it too busy, and I would have lost my cute little bunny focal point in the creation, by using a bunch of prints. So I just chose a few blender style strips, and then combined that with some solids that really, coordinated with that center bunny charm square. All right, so we start off with our square. And again, your square can be as small or as large as you want. I have seen log cabin blocks start off with 2.5-inch squares. Then you build your log cabin block around that size square. Like I said, I started with 5.5-inch charm square. You can even go larger than that. Somebody just said this would be great to make into a pot holder or even a placemat. That's exactly right. You could take this block, you could just add on to the sides and make it a larger kind of placemat or table runner. You could stop after sewing on maybe 3 or 4 strips to your center block and then bind it and give yourself a little loop, and you have a cute quilty pot holder. So lots of ways to make this smaller. And then of course, adding more blocks to make an even larger quilt. So this quilt, I believe the finished dimensions are about 34 by 48, I want to say. It is in the description on the blog post. So there's a full blog post all about making this quilt and how you can personalize it and the things that I did. So if you want to get more information and read that entire post, you can head on over to blog.sulky.com. It'll be the first post that shows today. You can also just search log cabin and it will come up for you as well. All right, so we start off by sewing our first strip to one of the side edges of that main square that we're starting off for the center of our log cabin block. This is also a great place to add a machine embroidery motif. Or you can save that block and do a really pretty quilting motif in the center of it and then build your quilting out from there. So if that center block is a solid color fabric and then you add prints all around it, you could add a pretty machine embroidery motif to that center block. So lots of ways to personalize this and make it your own. So first things first, you're going to sew that first smallest strip to the side of your square. So these lengths will match, right? And we're going with all 2.5-inch strips because I wanted to utilize strips from a jelly roll that I had. Then we're going to fold that or unfold that, press our seams. Now for a log cabin block, I press my seams toward the darker fabric. I find that a lot of pressed open seams start to get a little bulky at the corners. So I press my seams toward the darker fabric as I work my way around that center block. So after we have that side piece added, which is that light peach color, then we add that blender peach color. Now, traditionally with log cabin quilt blocks, one side that you're building off of, let's say the right side edge and the lower edge of your square is generally, let's say, light colors. On the opposite side, so the left edge and the upper edge are dark colors. And that way you can create really cool effects when you add and stitch your blocks together in your rows and widths. I don't know why I can't come up with that word. So if you have all lights going this way, all darks going this way, when you rotate your blocks and position them together, you can get hourglass looking shapes. You can get really cool sort of diagonal looking shapes and colors. So you can choose to do it that way. I sort of followed that quote unquote rule. But then, I don't know, I just kind of went crazy and put whatever colors I wanted to, wherever I wanted to. All right, so sorry if that was really confusing. I'm sure that can be cleared up by the Sulky Secrets to Successful Quilting book that I mentioned earlier, since I'm having a little hard time keeping it together today. Okay. So now that we have the first two strips, we're just going to continue around the square. The next strip goes on that left edge, and I kind of cut these as I go because, again, I am working with pre-cut strips, so I can simply add another strip to that opposite edge. After I sew it, I can trim it up even with the edge and continue around in that way. You don't have to pre-cut all of these so that they match all of those edges as you're sewing. So it's really forgiving. That's why I like it for a sort of first quilt project. And then you can see I have it open, and then we take it and we press it. And then here it is nice and flat and pressed. And then you're going to add more strips. So you can continue on as much as you want for however large a block you want. Now, you could create an entire quilt that's just one log cabin block. Your center square could even be 10 inches, 12 inches, 16 inches, and then you work your way around and around and around and around. You can even add extra to the upper and lower edges to make it, more of like a bed size or more of a rectangle, and then have that center focal square where, again, you add lots of quilting or you add a really cool large scale embroidery design, and that could be your entire quilt. Or you can stop at a certain point and create lots of similar blocks or exactly the same blocks that you're going to sew together, like I did for this quilt. All right, so now we have that upper edge is sewn to the block, and then you're going to press that again. And now I have a stack of blocks. I could stop right here. I could make pot holders with these. I could add borders and sashing right here and consider this my finished block. Or again, I can continue on sewing more strips, making a larger block. So here I have another solid fabric going on. And I actually really liked the look of this. So I added another side to the right edge, side and lower edge piece. I kind of liked that that center square was a little off center. I thought that actually looked pretty cool. So again, this could be my finished block. And I add borders, sashing and cornerstones, whatever else you want to complete your quilt, or just stitch these together, right sides facing, for as many across and down as you wish to create your quilt. I added another round though, so I have this really dark teal strip on the top, another blender print down the side, and I stopped there. So let's see how many strips I have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And this really dark peachy color became the sashing. Now, I had some leftover bunny squares, and I just couldn't let them go to waste. So I also decided to add cornerstones. A cornerstone is a little square that separates your sashing piece. And I just thought it really tied in the bunny and made it more about the bunny, if you will. All right, so after you have your blocks, you're going to decide, do I want sashing and cornerstones? Do I just want sashing? Do I want to just sew my blocks together, add a border, and quilt it up? So that is your choice as the designer. This image is showing you I'm adding sashing. So I have a strip going on the upper edge, and I have pinned the strip for sewing along that lower edge of the block. And then I need to create my longer sashing strips. So this is kind of what the block looks like with that upper and lower edge sashing sewn on. Then I need to create my longer sashing strips. So once I have sewn the upper and lower edges of one block, then I start sewing my blocks together, making sure that I have that sashing strip in between each block. And I'm only doing that along the upper and lower edges. Then I'm going to sew my sashing strips with those cornerstones attached, and then I'm going to add those strips in between my quilt block rows. So here I have the cornerstones going on, and then I have my long sashing strip with those cornerstones attached. And then it's a matter of pinning, pinning, pinning. You really want to pin along every single seam that you have to make sure that you are matching those up quite nicely with your strips. That way everything flows together, and when you go to quilt, your quilting lines are going to look really similar along all of those joins, all of those corners. All right, so here is what that looks like with the sashing and the cornerstones. I don't have any borders on here yet. And I think it actually looks pretty cool without a border, but I didn't want my binding to kind of bite into the outer sashing pieces too much because I thought it was going to throw off the balance of the quilt. So I decided to add borders. Now, the other reason I wanted to add borders is because borders is really part of the quilt recipe, right? We've got our blocks, we've got our sashing, we've got our cornerstones, and we've got our borders. Those 4 ingredients are making up loads of quilt designs. From there, you can decide what you're going to omit, what you're going to keep, what you're going to personalize. If you don't want cornerstones, take that out of your recipe. So you will have blocks, sashing, and borders. And of course, your binding. All right. So at this point, I added a pretty wide border. Now, I don't know if it's just me or a lot of quilt patterns that I've made in the past, but I like a border that's about twice as wide as my sashing. And again, that's going to change based on just look and feel and however big you want your quilt to be or small. If you've created these 6 quilt blocks and your quilt isn't going to be large enough for the bed you want to put it on, or the purpose that the quilt is having, if it's a lap quilt or a baby quilt, then you can make your border wider to kind of make up that difference. So I added a 5-inch border, actually 5 1/4, actually 5 1/2, so that once I sewed it onto the sashing strip and then to account for the binding, it would be 5 inches finished, right? So I added 5 1/2-inch borders on the upper, lower, and side edges of the quilt top. Now, after I had them on, and I made my quilt sandwich using my trusty KK2000, my favorite thing. I don't think I've had a So What episode where I didn't mention this product. Once I had all of that done and my quilt sandwich was ready to quilt, I looked at it from afar. I stood up on a little step stool and I took a picture of it. That's what you're seeing here. And I thought, this border is way too wide. It makes this look like a tablecloth, or I don't know. I didn't like it after that, but I decided to keep it there. It would give me a little extra room to kind of grab on the quilt while I was quilting it. And then after I quilted it, I would take another look and see if I still didn't like the width of the border. So I kept it on there, kind of knowing I was going to be trimming a lot of it away before I applied the binding. So always, if you're in doubt, obviously go wider than you think you're going to want. You can always trim it away where a border is concerned. So here I am spraying both the back of my quilt top and the top of my batting. That gives me a little extra kind of, temporary glue to make sure that my quilt top isn't going to go anywhere during the quilting process. Now you can always add some pins for extra security. And the pins I recommend, I don't know if you guys have heard of these, but they are called Clover Wonder Pins. We have these at sulky.com and they are amazing. If you have kind of arthritic hands, or if you just have issues kind of getting into the middle of your quilt to put a quilting pin or safety pin in there for a little bit of pin basting. Sometimes when we do that, the quilt top will shift on us and then we've got to, smooth it out again, try to get underneath it and along the top of it to place our pin. This totally eliminates that. So what you do is, you see how this pin is curved? What you do is insert this through all layers and simply press down on the top, and all of a sudden you have pinned through your quilt layers. These are so great. Grab these up at sulky.com. You will not be disappointed. I always add a few pins, even if I have spray basted a quilt, because our trusty Sulky KK2000 is air soluble. So over the course of about 36 to 48 hours, this is going to start dissipating into the air. And if it takes you longer than that to complete your quilting, you will find that you're losing some of your stickiness that you really need to keep your quilt layers together. We don't want any shifting. We don't want that to happen. So putting a couple of extra pins is really going to save you there. And you can always remove the pins, do a little more spray basting, smooth down some of your quilt when you come back to it. But those pins are just lifesavers. When I used them the first time, I was like, I'm never going back to anything else. All right, so after we have spray basted, made our quilt sandwich. Now, the quilting process. I mentioned that 30 weight cotton blendables thread. That's what I love using for quilting, and I'm going to show you the perfect color I found for this fabric combination. And I will say, in all the quilts that I have made and projects I have made while at Sulky here, I always seem to find the perfect blendables thread. The color combinations are just amazing. I am guaranteeing you, when I make this project and go to quilt it, I will find the perfect blendables variety that has the oranges and the yellows and maybe even some grays in it. So I was just floored that I found the perfect blendables for this color combination. But before we get to that, plotting out your quilting stitches. This is where people get super intimidated and they decide they're just going to send their quilt top to a long armor. They're going to pay for this service. They're going to get their quilt back in 2-3 weeks, a month, however long it takes. And it's going to be beautiful. And there's nothing wrong with that. I have certainly done it my own self, mostly because I have so many projects in the queue that I can't possibly get to quilting all of them myself. But there is something so satisfying about creating your quilt, soup to nuts, the whole thing yourself, not letting any of it go to anyone else, and really creating the whole thing. And a small project like this, or your first quilt attempt, why not try doing some straight line quilting or even quilting in the ditch and trying your hand at it on your own machine. So for that 30 weight blendables or 30 weight solid thread, you'll need a 90-14 needle. And I use a 90-14 quilting needle for quilting. I find it just performs the best. I've also tried a 90-14 universal. That's okay. I like the quilting needle better. I think it's because I go at a faster speed for the most part, and the quilting needle doesn't have as like a universal needle has almost a ballpoint to it. Quilting needle is a little bit sharper for you. Okay. So to plot my quilting lines, instead of just quilting in the ditch of each seam, which would be perfectly fine here, especially for a beginner, those seam lines are great lines to follow with your needle. So that's a really easy way to do your own quilting. I decided to quilt diagonal lines across all of the blocks and do kind of a diamond shape across the quilt. And I just did straight line quilting, no free motion, no dropping the feed dogs. And to plot out those lines, I cut strips of sticky Fabri-Solvi and placed them along the quilt top so I could follow those lines with my stitching. And I only did a few lines and then I worked off of those with my quilt guide. But I wanted to be sure that I was following the right path, okay? Now you could certainly use a chalk pencil or a removable fabric marker to also draw your quilting lines. But the sticky Fabri-Solvi is so great because to remove it, you can either just peel away all of those strips that you created, or if you accidentally stitched over them, or if you stitched over them on purpose, you can simply wash all of that away once your quilt is completed and bound and totally finished. You could throw the whole thing in the washing machine and all of that sticky Fabri-Solvi will just dissolve and be gone. No trace of markings, nothing that didn't, wash away or come away as it was intended. Sometimes those removable fabric markers aren't as removable as we wished that they were, if you know what I mean. So this is a great marking method. If you also want to try your hand at free motion quilting, you can take yardage of sticky Fabri-Solvi or the printable sheets of sticky Fabri-Solvi and draw out your quilting plan, place that right on the fabric right side, and do all your free motion by following your drawn lines. This is particularly great if you have this center square. Maybe this is a solid fabric, or maybe you want to do a pretty flower or something in the middle of this focal point square in your log cabin blocks. You could take a sheet of sticky Fabri-Solvi, put it right on here, and then draw out your flower so that it fits perfectly in this block. And then you can add additional quilting along each one of your strips and just draw it on there on your sticky Fabri-Solvi. Sew over all of your lines, wash it all away after the quilt is bound and completed. So lots of options there, and that is why Sticky Fabri-Solvi is on sale right now, 30% off, so you can try it for yourself. I know you will love it. It's great not only for plotting quilting lines like this by cutting those strips, but also drawing your quilting plan onto and just creating that with free motion, even just straight stitching as well. If you don't want to cut strips, you could put the whole sheet of Sticky Fabri-Solvi right on your quilt top, draw your lines. I think my lines are an inch apart. So draw your lines, stitch over them, wash it away. So really, really easy tip to do your own quilting and really just take the fear out of, oh, I have to create these designs and I have to move the fabric while I sew and I have to control the speed of my foot as well so that I have consistent stitches and all of that stress that can come from attempting free motion, especially for the first time. So, definitely utilize these tips and these products that make it easier, that take that fear away, and that allow you to really have fun with it, maybe try something new, and do your own quilting, especially if you are making just one block or maybe a set of 6 individual blocks and you're going to use those as placemats maybe. You'll have more control over trying your hand at free motion on something smaller rather than going right to a large quilt for the first time. So again, a pot holder size, try some free motion, why not? A placemat size, something like that. Try these sheets of Sticky Fabri-Solvi and you'll never go back. You'll love it so much. All right, so I've plotted the lines and here you can see the 30 weight blendables that I found for this project. This one has those greens, those peaches, the teals. It was perfect. So another thing I recommend, especially when you're going with a blendables variety of thread, before you start quilting, you can take, even a yard of thread out of the spool. Put it across the top of your quilt top and just see if you like the blendables for that quilt top. Looks can be deceiving sometimes. Maybe you think it's the perfect thread, but then when it goes over, one of the colors on your quilt top, it almost looks brown or it looks black or it looks like a color that you didn't want in the quilt. Then you can go with a solid 30 weight cotton. Or you can change up the color based on the fabric colors you're using. So maybe you want to quilt all of the peachy orange sections with a teal color, and you want to quilt all the teal sections with a peachy color. Or you'd rather have those colors blend in, so you switch it up. So that's a good just kind of practice to get into, is just lay a length of thread over the top of your quilt and see if that's the color that you want for your finished look. All right, so here is all the quilting done, and I have it on a darker background, so it's a little bit washed out, but all of those diagonal lines are completed, and I took a look at it again with those 5-inch borders, and I decided, nope, I am going to trim those up so that my border is the same width as my sashing. So I trimmed that at 2 1/4 inches because again, we have that seam allowance. So when it's bound, it's going to look like 2 inches, just like my sashing pieces, just like my log cabin strips. So everything was now nicely balanced and ready for binding. I made my own binding strips using that kind of medium peach tone that I featured in the blocks. I always like to bind my quilt with some of the, or one of the prints or solids that is featured in the block. It just really ties everything together. But another thing you can do is if you have some of your jelly roll strips left over from trimming, you know, as you have gone around your block, you can make a scrappy binding, and you can sew all of those little 2.5-inch wide strips that you have left over, sew those all together into one long strip and use that to bind your whole quilt. That way you're bringing in every single print and every single solid that you featured in the block and bringing that around to your binding. So it's a way to utilize those scraps right away and bring in all of those great colors into your binding. All right, there we have the finished quilt displayed on my couch with the perfect Target pillow. I hope you all find the perfect Target pillow that you need for the holiday, whatever holiday you like to celebrate, or just for spring, or create your own, of course. You know, if I had enough fabric left over, I could have created a cute little pillow, but man, that was just so perfect. Here's a closer look at those quilting stitches. You can see I went diagonally across the blocks in a sort of diamond or X pattern across the top of the quilt. All right, I'm going to go to some questions. If you have a question, be sure to put it in the comments or the chat here and we will address it. Linda says, when making a scrappy binding, should you do diagonal seams or straight seams? So it's really a personal preference when you're not dealing with bias cut binding, which these jelly rolls are cut across the width, right? They are not cut on the bias. So if you use your jelly roll strips for binding, they're not bias cut. You can, if you want, piece them with a straight seam and just, you know, open it up and you'll have a straight seam. You certainly can also cut them on a 45 and have your seam going diagonal. So when you open it up, you'll have this diagonal seam, which is what you would do if you're working with bias binding or bias cut fabrics. So with something like this, you can cut your fabric strips on the grain or on the bias. We don't have curved edges that we need to go around, so we don't need the stretch that the bias cut fabric is going to give us. That's why bias binding is cut on the bias, mostly for things like pot holders or curved edges. And it's really a multi-purpose binding in that regard. So you can use it for, you know, regular straight cut corners or curved edges. So for something like this quilt that is definitely a rectangle with square corners, you can cut your binding or use your jelly roll strips, and you don't need that additional stretch. But as far as joining them, it's going to be a personal preference when you're going with strips, you know, straight grain strips. If you are fine with seeing the seams, I think they're a little bit more noticeable. Your binding strips, I think they're a little bit more noticeable when they are straight across rather than, you know, rather than cut on a 45. So like this. I think this is a little less noticeable when you wrap it around the quilt edge. So that's really just going to be up to you. That was a really long answer to your question, but I hope it makes sense to you. Nancy is saying bobbin thread. What bobbin thread are we using? So for the 30 weight thread, I want it to look equally as beautiful on the lining side or the backing of my quilt. This is the backing fabric that I chose. I want that thread to also pop off of my backing fabric. So I used the same exact thread in the bobbin that I used in the needle. Now, if you want it to sort of blend in more to the backing fabric, you can go with a lighter weight bobbin thread. You can choose the 50 weight cotton and steel thread by Sulky. That's a really great weight. A lot of people swear by 50 weight for the entire process of the quilt. from the piecing to the quilting. And that's definitely a personal preference. I use the 50 weight for piecing. It's a perfect weight that doesn't kind of make that telltale sort of bump along each seam. It just blends right in with the fabric and you have a nice flat quilt top when you're done. So I use the 50 weight for piecing, then I use the 30 weight for quilting. I have used the 50 weight for quilting as well in instances where maybe I have a lot of machine embroidery on the quilt or other embellishments, or I really want the fabric print to be more noticeable than the thread that I put on top of it. In that case, I'm going to go with a lighter weight thread that blends into the fabric colors and the fabric prints that I've chosen for the quilt. So if you want your backing to blend in more, put that 50 weight in the bobbin and use the 30 weight on top. You will still get a nice balanced stitch. For the 30 weight, I also lengthen my stitch to about a 3.5. And that's just so I have a more prominent stitch and my heavier stitches or my heavier thread isn't too close together. So another thing I forgot to mention. All right. People saying good tips. Thank you so much. Susan asks, do you quilt with the 3 layers? I assume you mean our backing, batting, and quilt top. And yes, I quilt through all of those layers. Then I trim it up when I'm done, at which point that's when I trimmed my border width down to 2.5 inches, or down to 2.25 inches rather, since it was already sewn. And then bind it all to, encase all of those raw edges within the binding. All right, Loretta's all over that sticky topper. I know, and it's 30% off right now, along with those 30 weight blendables. So you can grab up those. Denise says, great way to make a little quilt. I need more tops to practice quilting on. Exactly. All right, need to try those pins. Again, those are Clover Wonder Pins. That's what those are called. Clover Wonder Pins. You can find those at sulky.com. Those and the Clover Wonder Clips are probably just the 2 big old game changers for me as far as constructing and creating quilts. Do you quilt before the binding? Yes, I always quilt before the binding. You could have some, you could need to trim it up after that. And that's why if you go to the blog post about creating this quilt, you will see that I cut the batting and the backing larger than my quilt top. And that way, if there's any shifting while I'm quilting, or if there's any kind of stretching, sometimes if you add a lot of stitches, it'll kind of stretch your quilt top out towards the edges a little bit. We're always kind of working from the center out when we add quilting stitches as well for that purpose. And we want to kind of go in the same direction. If you are straight line quilting specifically, and you start quilting from the center, let's say toward the lower edge, and then you turn your quilt around and start working from the lower edge toward the center, you can have shifting and pushing and pulling within that strip that you're quilting on. And it can look like you have puckers going across because you have quilted it in 2 different directions. So you want to work from the center going out along, the same direction. Then you can flip your quilt over and work from the center going out on the opposite direction. Is that making sense? All right. There were a lot of questions about the bobbin, so glad we addressed that. And yes, Lori, this sounds great. I have a quilt that I pieced by hand. I will also be hand quilting it. It's a queen size with scallops as the final border. A lot of work. Looking forward to seeing it. Be sure to join our Sulky Stitch and Post Facebook group because we would love to see pictures of that. All right. Leslie says, did you start by stitching on the Solvy? So I stitched next to the Solvy. I cut 1/2-inch strips of Fabri-Solvy, sticky Fabri-Solvy, stuck those to my quilt. And again, I only did about 3 strips of Solvy. And that was so that I could make sure that when I got to one of my cornerstones, I pivoted and went the other direction, because a lot of the times I get in the groove of things and I'll just stitch right straight down to the opposite end and then have to rip all of that out because I forgot the design that I wanted to do. So the sticky Fabri-Solvy strips, I cut at 1/2 inches, and then I placed them right next to each other so I would know to quilt every inch. So I just stitched right next to the Fabri-Solvy edges. That way I could pull them off and remove them. But I will say that some of them I accidentally stitched over a little bit. And for those, I could just take a wet cotton swab or Q-tip and apply it along the areas that I stitched over. And then the sticky Fabri-Solvy will just lift right up. If you stitch all over it and you're doing a free motion design, wait until you have bound the quilt and then throw it in the washing machine, and all of that sticky Fabri-Solvy will just wash away. Obviously, you need to make sure that the fabrics that you're using in your quilt are washable. So if you're doing something with silks or something like that that cannot withstand water, you'll need to do a different transfer method for quilting that quilt. All right. So Francie says, I just did that. Threw it in the wash. So quick and easy. Love it. And yes, I quilted diagonal lines across the last quilt I did. Had a little trouble removing the chalk lines. I find that it's such a problem. You know, especially if you can't really see the chalk lines sometimes, depending on the fabric that you're marking. And so then you try to mark it a little heavy-handedly, and then you really can't get rid of those markings and it becomes a bear. So using that sticky Fabri-Solvy is definitely the solution if you have had that same problem with removing chalk on any project, really. Okay. What was the best size for your border? So again, I originally cut my border widths to 5.5 inches. I ended up cutting it down to 2.5 inches. That way, when it was finished and I had sewn it, accounting for seam allowances and my binding, it had a finished look of 2 inches wide. So it was the same width as the sashing that I used and those jelly roll strips that made up my log cabin blocks. I just found that gave it a really balanced look, much more balanced than having that really wide border. But again, you can take that log cabin block. Let me see if I can find the one that's finished. This one doesn't have a couple of strips on it, but you can take this block and you can arrange this in any way you want. You can put 2 of these next to each other so that the peach colors match and you can have kind of this hourglass look for your finished quilt. Or you can rotate the blocks so that the dark sides are all on one edge, the light sides are all on the other, and have kind of a diagonal stripe effect for your finished quilt top. Now for this, I simply just sewed them together in my rows and sections. And that is because my little bunny print is a directional print. So if I were to go rotating some of the blocks, some of my bunnies would be upside down. So I had my blocks sewn together in the exact same orientation. But if you're not using a directional print, you can really have fun moving your blocks around, some, upside down and whatnot, to create different really cool looks for your finished quilt. So that's another way that you can personalize this and really make it your own. And man, the comments are still coming in for our In the Hoop greeting cards embroidery sewing session. I probably, while we were talking, I got maybe 30, 40 maybe even 50 more comments, all saying how much they love the In the Hoop greeting cards embroidery session. So head on over to sewingonline.sulky.com and register for this great, great class. I think you all will absolutely love it. All right, lots of people saying I must try the sticky Fabra-Solvy. Can't wait. Solvy strips is my favorite tip. All right. Do you backstitch if you only quilt from the center out? Great question, Esther. I did not backstitch. So when I start each quilting line, I put my needle in the fabric and bring it up, and I bring my bobbin thread to the top of my quilt. Then I quilt the line. Then when I go to start in the center and work out towards the opposite edge, I do the same thing. When I'm done with that whole row, I actually tie off my quilting threads, but there are different schools of thought here. You could also, there are specialty needles that you can use that you can bring those threads in through your quilt layers. And actually, if you kind of knot them or bring them through, you can feel in there and make sure that your needle is getting kind of inside the batting. And you can pop that little knot that you've created in through those layers inside of your quilt. So it really looks seamless and you have no knots showing and no back stitches. Now, that's getting a little, I don't know, persnickety, or I don't know if it really is, because I am known to do that as well. It really just depends on your desired finished look. So that's kind of up to you. But there are specialty needles you can use for that. You can also just use a hand sewing needle and kind of try to thread those thread ends in through the middle of your quilt. And that's a really great way to have a finished look without any thread ends popping out of knots or anything like that. So that's what I would recommend. All right. Janice says the thing I have a problem with is getting all of the quilt under the machine. I feel ya. So when I'm working from the center out, I try to roll up the side of the quilt that needs to fit under my machine arm as tightly as I can. And then you can use binder clips, or you can even use big hair clips if you happen to have those, to kind of secure it while you're working on that center part of the quilt, and then just carefully unroll it little by little as you get towards that quilt edge. So that may be helpful for you. It's also really helpful to have a machine that fits flush with your table, so that there's no quilt hanging off of the side of your machine, which can kind of cause pulling and stuff like that too. So I feel ya. And Esther says, I love the Clover Wonder pins. I've stopped using any other pins. Can't say enough wonderful things about them. I have all 3 styles. Ooh, I didn't even know there were 3 styles. I only have the 1, so I'll have to check that out. But yes, these are a lifesaver for pinning lots of things, lots of quilty projects. All right, I so appreciate you all giving such great tips for free motion, great tips for each other. That's what Sew What is all about, to talk about what we're sewing, what we have sewn in the past, how we can help each other out and learn from each other every single week. So I appreciate you being here with me. Lots of names I recognize from week to week. So it's really, really great to share this time with you. What about clear thread pre-wound bobbins? Looks like fishing line. Great, great question, Ronnie. So Sulky has invisible thread. We have clear invisible thread and we have a smoke version of invisible thread. And it's the best invisible thread out there. It sews just like polyester. It's a polyester invisible thread. It takes heat. You can wash it. You can iron it. You don't have to worry about it melting. It's a great, great thread to quilt with. You could actually use that in the bobbin with 30 weight thread on the top. I know, go crazy. Or you can use invisible thread in the top and in the bobbin if you really want those fabrics to shine and you want that quilting to just melt away into the quilt top. So a really great option as well. And I would also use the 9014 needle with the invisible thread. And when you're using it in the bobbin, slow that bobbin speed way down, almost to nothing. And you don't want any excess, you don't want it to be super tight on the bobbin. That's going to just add tension actually when you're sewing. So you want to wind your bobbin at a slower speed and then only wind it about half full. You don't need, your bobbin overpacked. That's also going to perhaps mess with the tension. So be conservative with the invisible thread, and I think you'll really love using it. If you haven't used it before, just make one log cabin block and turn it into a little pot holder. This was the start of the block, the one that I really liked with the sort of off-center center square. Turn this into a little pot holder, hot pad, experiment with some invisible thread, go over the top of it with some 30-weight blendables, call it your practice, bind it, and then use it as a little hot pad for the holidays, for Easter, for spring, for whatever holidays are coming up for you. So great ways to practice your skills, great ways to have a little accompaniment. Maybe if you're making a pillow, or this would be great for a little pillow top as well. Just put a little backing on it, stuff it with fiberfill. And if you want to quilt the front of your pillow, do your quilt sandwich like you normally would, and then just add a backing to it. You can add a little piping for a border for the pillow, hand sew it closed, and you have a little quilted pillow that you can use as well that maybe matches the quilt that you're going to create once you've perfected all of your stitches and decided on the thread that you want to use for your project. All right. The bicycle clips for getting the fabric into the throat of the machine. I don't know what a bicycle clip is. So tell us more. Tell us more about bicycle clips. Interesting. See, you learn something new every day and hopefully every Tuesday here on So What? All right. Well, again, thank you all for joining me today. Really appreciate it. Next Tuesday, we're going to have more quilty fun here on So What? So join us. Be sure to take advantage of, Be sure to take advantage of our great sale that's going on right now. 30% off 30-weight cotton solids and blendables thread, all sizes, plus 30% off sticky Fabri-Solvi. I hope I convinced some of you to try that in your quilting endeavors. And Soft and Sheer Stabilizer. Great stabilizer if you like to make t-shirt quilts. Soft and Sheer or Soft and Sheer Extra as well as another great fusible that's really great for t-shirt quilts, but I digress. All right, enjoy those sales, enjoy National Quilting Month, and we've got a newsletter coming out this coming Friday. So if you are not signed up to get Sulky newsletters, you can sign up at sulky.com. We have a great free project for you this Friday that I think you're all going to love. So if you are part of that newsletter subscription, you will get a newsletter every month from Sulky with free projects and deals and steals and notes from me and more tips and tricks. So be sure to sign up for our newsletter at sulky.com so that you can be the first to try out new things and get all of that information that you so desire. So have a wonderful day, everyone. Be sure to sign up for the embroidery sewing session. I can't wait to see how you all love it. Can't wait to see those cards. Post pictures of your creations on our Sulky Stitch and Post Facebook group. If you can't find it, just search for Sulky Stitch and Post and it should come up for you. And we can't wait to see what you will create. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.